our learning should be in the merit of the safe return, speedily safe return of the hostages, the healing of all those who are injured, the comfort to all those who are bereaved, and to the protection of our soldiers and all of our brothers and sisters, and all of us. So yesterday we were on the topic of birds and checking for the Rambam had specifically began. He specifically began by talking about checking simanim, checking for the signs of kosher birds, and so we began that talk about that. In fact, we don't tend to rely on signs when it comes to birds. We tend to rely on Masorah, on tradition, because the way the Torah directed what you can eat and what you can't eat, the Torah identified the non-kosher birds, implying that any bird that's not on the list would be kosher. And we're not sure of the meaning of some of those birds, so therefore we're left to a tradition as to what they are. Now, certainly some of them we do know, and the Gemara was able to identify certain, what they called simanim, of what would be a non-kosher bird, and the distinction between non-kosher birds and kosher birds. When the Rambam is talking about simanim, he seems to be talking about something like that. He himself said that the Torah itself doesn't give us the simanim, the signs for it. So yesterday, Moishi sent me some links to some of the stuff that we were talking about, and problem is I have it on my WhatsApp, so I'm just gonna now send this to my email. So one of the things that Moshe was trying to find was that article that I had said was in Torah from Dixie, from the Atlanta Scholars Kollel. And now appears Moshe did some follow-up with the Atlanta Scholars Kollel. They weren't sure what we were referring to. So I'm thinking that it must be something that they had sent out. The writer of the article is actual Michael Brody, who was a professor at Emory. And Torah from Dixie is not actually their publication. But I still think I somehow got it from them. But anyway, so, but I did find it. I just now want to send it to and I thought we'd look at it. Okay, so now we're going to share the screen. And hello, Beverly, Mo, and Lois. Here we are. Hi. All right, so now I'm going to share. I'm going to share screen. So they're looking into more than just they're looking into celebrating Thanksgiving in general. And so whether celebrating Thanksgiving is a problem, is Thanksgiving a non-Jewish holiday? Is it not a non-Jewish holiday? Okay. Now, No. I can't believe this. This did not. This would be annoying as. Right, let's just. Oh, this is hysterical. I don't know why I rely on my memory for anything. This has nothing to do with turkeys. My memory, they talked about the turkey. Just going to look here one more time. Oh, maybe they referenced it. Oh, here. Okay, I'm just going to allow this to be a senior moment. That's what I'm going to blame it on. I'm going to blame it on a senior moment. Because that article does not address whether or not.
So you've come over to our side.
Yeah, sorry about that. Anyways, amongst the other very important links that Mo brought, he brought a couple of the links to the hyrax and the hare discussion, and also to the deer and gazelle discussion, which, although not about birds, it did reflect this problem we have with being certain about the terms that are used in the Torah when it comes to referring to items that might be food. So thank you, Mo, for that. My mind is just a fog.
There's one from the yeshiva world that talks about the kashrus of it.
Oh, okay. Let's see that one. Let me just. Oh, the kashrus of the turkey. Thank you, Mo.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mo. That's why it's very important that Mo's on this for various reasons. But that will be okay. Okay, go one more time.
And this is the one that they sent the Atlantic Kollel people.
Okay. Oh, good.
So maybe it will work out.
All right. Thank you. That will explain. You know how you have this thing when you're when you mistake a celebrity name. I always have an explanation after the fact. My kids always make fun of me when I use the wrong name for a celebrity. But then I always have some backup explanation for why I thought that was it. So this will be my backup explanation. It's still somehow related to them. Okay. Okay. Kashrus of a turkey. Rabbi Yehuda or Hoffman. Many people are eating turkey this evening on account of Thanksgiving. But did the Tanaim and Amoraim eat turkey? did the Gaonim or the Rishonim? The answer, of course, is they did not. The turkey was only found in the Americas and only came to Europe after 1493. But that does not mean that the turkey is not kosher. The Torah also gave us a list of tameh birds that are non-kosher. When the Torah says tameh, which we usually translate as impure, they mean not kosher. What we would say nowadays is not kosher. This list is found in the Torah portion of Shmini. Technically, if a bird is not on this list, it would not be forbidden. The Mishnah and Tractate Hulin gives us 4 signs in regard to the list of birds in the Torah. It says, every bird that is a predator is not a kosher bird. Sign 2, every kosher bird has an extra toe. Sign 3, all kosher birds have a crop. And in scientific language, it's called an ingluvius, or mora. The crop is an expanded muscular portion near the gullet or throat. It is a part of the digestive tract, essentially an enlarged part of the esophagus. As with most other organisms that have a crop, the crop is used to temporarily store food. All kosher birds also have a peelable kurkavan or a gizzard. This is called a pupik in Yiddish. Nonetheless, based upon the ruling of the Ramah, we only concern birds that have a tradition to eat from the past. What about the Ramah? He is the last word for Ashkenazi Jews, usually, almost always. Moshe Isserlich lived in the 1500s in Krakow. Certainly this would apply for sure to Ashkenazic Jews. What then about the newly discovered birds such as the turkey? Although we had no tradition for the turkey, it was eaten by Jews. It seems that when it was discovered in the New World, most poskim, halachic decisors, permitted it. There are 2 reasons for this. Either because they classified it as a type of chicken, and there was no concern that it was a cross-fertilization from a list of forbidden birds, because it was discovered prior to the adoption and spread of the ruling of the Ramah. This explanation is provided by the Sholem Yerodea. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky personally did not eat turkey on account of the problem with the Masorah. The Torah world has accepted the turkey. And that is the end of that article. So thank you. That is a very brief article about it. Okay, now we're going to go back to our Rambam. Okay. And I apologize for my fogginess today. S-E.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, but this discussion I know I've told it before, always reminds me of that time I was standing in Hungarian right before, Thanksgiving, and a lady said to another, "So are you having Thanksgiving dinner?" And she said, "No, but the family's coming over for turkey." I mean,
yeah, making that distinction.
yes.
That article goes into it more in depth, that there were some people who felt it was absolutely wrong, that it's going in the ways of the Gentiles, which is forbidden by the Torah. Idolaters, which is forbidden by the Torah. And then you have a more Parav approach, and maybe even a slightly positive approach that they present over there for it. But it's certainly uncomfortable for people. It's even for me, it's been sort of an uncomfortable relationship with Thanksgiving. When I went to yeshiva in Israel, and then I just ended up staying and living in Israel, I always missed Thanksgiving. I always missed it. I really felt like I had a kind of warm connection to the notion of Thanksgiving from early childhood. And I always missed it. So when I came back, I I wanted to be connected to it today, but I also found a kind of uncomfortable connection. My father also very much liked having Thanksgiving. And so a lot of times I would have it with him. But I have had Thanksgivings where we didn't have anything at all. Yeah, I have a sort of uncomfortable relationship with it. One time when I was in high school, a friend of mine, Akiva Turk, who's now Akiva Tor, and he's the Israeli ambassador to South Korea, he and I decided we're having a clandestine Thanksgiving. So there was this room behind the gym in our building, which nobody ever went into. And we got a broiler, and we bought it was a part of a turkey breast. And so we made a turkey breast, and we had root beer and apple pie. That was our version of Thanksgiving. But I remember we were sitting back, we were in that room, and nobody ever goes in that room. And it just so happens, and that one of the Rabbeim of the yeshiva decided he's giving a tour to somebody from the outside. And he was giving him a tour, and he was in the gym area, showing him the gym area. And we were trying to be silent back there, but you could clearly smell. We had broiled turkey, in the from the back there, and we could see, like through a crack when we were looking at him, that he could tell that something was going on back there, but he diverted the person, and we did not get caught. But we had a clandestine Thanksgiving during high school. Their regular fare at the yeshiva for high school were hot dogs, which had a very rubbery consistency. And it was our least favorite lunch of the week. And I feel like that wasn't accidental that they served our least favorite lunch on Thanksgiving. But we had it. We secretly had it. Okay.
Your story, I don't know, it just reminds me of how in England, they used to smuggle priests into the priest holes in people's houses to celebrate the day.
This was.
I love it.
Yes, there's versions of a lot of these things, which I've had it when I've been around pastors where you're sharing stories there, like these parallel stories that go on, even though completely different dressing to the stories, but yes. Okay, Sefer Mitzvot. It's gonna happen. We're gonna get there. Okay. Try very hard not to touch the wrong button. No. Okay, here we go. 1 second. Okay. Okay, 1 second. Okay, here we go. 1 second. By the way, on this thing right before the grasshopper thing, so I, for a year, Or Sameach started an Ask the Rabbi column right at the beginning of the internet, and I was the one who wrote the column. And one of my first columns was about which grasshoppers are kosher, which grasshoppers / locusts were kosher. And I put a lot of work into it, and it was largely panned. And when they were panning it, here, 1 second, give me 1 second here. So it was largely panned, and most people said because they just found the whole subject disgusting, even though I thought it was exotic and interesting. Okay. That is he commanded us to check for the signs of permissible fish, which are written in the Torah, and that is his, maybe he blessed, saying, these are what you may eat from all that is in the water. And in explanation, they said in the Gemara, one who eats an impure fish transgresses a positive and negative commandment. As it's stated, these are they that you may eat. So whenever it says in a positive language, that means it's a positive commandment. Makes me understand that one besides these may not be eaten. So as long as it has these signs, which are scales and fins, it can be eaten. If it doesn't, it cannot be eaten. So that's a positive and a negative commandment. If it has these, you can eat it. If it doesn't has these, then you cannot eat it. And a negative commandment that is derived from a positive commandment is a positive commandment. Behold, it has been made clear that its statement, these you may be eat, is a positive commandment. Again, a lot of his work in this book is to explain what are the mitzvahs and how he knows that this is a mitzvah that should be counted. So that's why he makes this, effort by telling us, and that's how I know it's a positive commandment. And the content of our saying that is a positive commandment is what we have mentioned to you, and that is our being commanded to administer these signs and to say that this is permissible to eat and not permissible to eat. So in other words, checking the fish and seeing if it has the permitted signs. And you shall distinguish the clean beast from the unclean. And their distinguishment is through the signs. And therefore, each and every one of these four types, so he's mentioned animals like cattle, sheep, and goats. He mentioned birds. He mentioned grasshoppers or locusts, and now he's mentioning fish. Each one of these is a separate commandment, because that's another thing. Even though we had mentioned that according to the Rambam, Nachmanides, this isn't a positive commandment. According to him, it's not a positive commandment asking you to check for these signs. And when you check for the signs, you're fulfilling a positive commandment. It's a different kind of positive commandment. It's just that if you ate it and it didn't have these signs, then you violated the positive commandment. But nobody's asking you to necessarily check the signs as a mitzvah. It's just a pragmatic thing that if you ate something that didn't have these signs, you violated a commandment. So according to him, when you're actually checking for the signs, you're not fulfilling a mitzvah. You're not. So like when I was talking about it, and this seems to be the Rambam's understanding, it was like you could think to yourself, hey, let's do a mitzvah. And you go and buy yourself some salmon or trout or something. And you look, especially for the trout, you look to make sure that it has scales. And then you're comfortable, even if it ends up it wasn't a trout, at least it is a kosher fish. You've actually fulfilled a mitzvah. You went out of your way to do a new mitzvah. And that's, and that works according to the Rambam. According to Nachmanides, no, it's not a mitzvah in the sense that taking a lulav or an esrog is a mitzvah, or sitting in a sukkah is a mitzvah, or blowing a shofar is a mitzvah. This is just, if you ate it and didn't have this, you violated something that
Rabbi,
God did.
Could it be that if you really didn't know, now when you go buy a trout, okay, or a salmon or something, if you really didn't know and you were looking, that could be considered a mitzvah, but not if you know.
Yeah. Yes, there are some who say that. But by the way, with the trout, not so simple. I mean, if you're an angler, and you're really, you know your fish, then you could say that you already know that you can just look at the fish and you see it's a trout. Many people are not that familiar with fish, and so for many people, if there was something that looked like, I'm not sure with trout, but I do know that fish are notoriously misidentified, and they are even misrepresented, not always on purpose, in supermarkets and in restaurants. And we were, I think I mentioned this the other day, that they did DNA testing, just spot testing at restaurants and supermarkets in New York, and I think they've done it in other places, just to check on this. And they found that 30%, up to 40% were mislabeled. So as a kosher consumer, when you go for fish, you are directed to make sure that there are scales. And so even if it's a fillet, sometimes with a fillet, there'll still be a little bit of skin. And if you can tell from the skin that it has scales, then that's all you need to know. But you do have to check for it. Salmon, because it's so recognizable because of its color, they still are comfortable with people buying salmon. There was another issue with what kind of knife did they use to fillet it, and there are ways of dealing with that. But when it comes to buying fish, you're still directed to look to make sure that there are scales. So more than with ground beef or something like that, there you're relying on the hechsher, but you wouldn't, even somebody who's very familiar with cattle may not know if he has ground beef or ground lamb. He may not be able to tell, or I don't know, ground of another kind of animal. But with fish, it still could be an issue. But you're making a point. They do say that in some of the commentaries when it comes to cattle, that it would only be somebody who's actually not sure and is checking because he's not sure for the signs that would fulfill the mitzvah according to the Rambam. But again, I think with fish, it's most of us might be in that ballpark. But so the Rambam is now telling us, because let's say we agree with the Rambam that it is a mitzvah to check for it, but why is it 4 different mitzvahs? Why don't you just say one of these 613 mitzvahs is to check to make sure your food is kosher, whether it's cattle or fish or locust or birds? Why is it 4 different ones? So that is part of his explanation each one of these times, because it says in the Torah, it goes out of its way to tell us each one of these in the language of a positive commandment, that signal to him that this is actually 4 different commandments and not just one. And that's another subject of scholarly discussion, whether this should be 4 or 1, and he's taking the position that this is 4 separate mitzvahs. We've already explained their expressions in each of the verses as an individual commandment, and the regulations of this commandment, meaning the signs of the fish, have already been explained in chapter 3 of Tractate Chulin. And again, this gives me my opportunity to talk about fish just for a moment, because fish have a kind of mysterious presence when it comes to the Torah. They certainly are acknowledged right away. We're told about the creation of fish. We're also told that the fish get a special blessing to be fruitful and multiply. We're also told in the blessing to the human, it says we're the human. I'm calling it the human, Adam. The human is told, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, avikiv shuha, and sort of conquer it. And then it says uradu b'digas hayam, and you shall show mastery or control or manage the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the animals that crawl on it. So fish are very much acknowledged in those first days of creation. But then they sort of disappear, and especially in this week's Torah portion of Noah, there's no discussion of the fate of fish. We're not told that Noah brought fish on the ark, and there's no discussion of what happened to the fish that were in the seas during the time of the flood. We know that there were boiling waters and things that would have been harmful to the fish. There's no really discussion about what happens to the fish. And then you have just the most brief mention of fish afterwards. They are the people, when they complain about their situation in the desert, they remember eating fish in Egypt. They mention that. And the Torah does, again, give us the signs for what is a kosher fish in that Torah portion of Shemini, and then later on in Deuteronomy and Re'eh. So they do get like some mention, but the way I've come to describe the mystery is that they don't appear as part of everyday life. There aren't stories of people. We have the reference. They said we ate fish in Egypt, but you don't see people eating or catching fish. There are no fish offerings. The Midrash even asked that at one point, why aren't there fish offerings? And it says because fish don't have faces. That was their explanation. One of the easy explanations would be that they're not easily available where the Jews lived. The Jews, once they're in Israel, the Jews are going to be living in a kind of mountainous region, like the middle mountainous areas. That tends to be where the Jews lived. There isn't a lot of discussion about life on the sea or near the rivers. And so you could say that's why it doesn't come up as much. That's why you're not seeing fishing stories or stories about the people having fish for dinner. And maybe you could say that's also why there aren't sacrifices using fish, because they're just not as readily available, as easily available. You could say that, but they don't. They say something about fish not having faces, which is sort of interesting. Also, there are just points where there's an effort, like for instance, in last week's Torah portion, right? God talks to Adam about what food's going to be available. He only discusses eating herbs and vegetables and fruit. He doesn't talk about the possibility of eating fish. And in the garden, there are rivers. It does talk about rivers. So, that would make it sound like even though there were fish, he's not supposed to eat fish because it doesn't offer that as one of his options. You could have fish. Later on, when Noah is told that he now can eat animals, there's no discussion about whether they can have fish. In the desert, you see that we saw this, we discussed this, that in the desert, they're allowed to eat meat, but only meat. When I say meat, cattle, sheep, or goats, they're only allowed to eat it if it was part of a sacrifice. They're not supposed to just slaughter animals to eat them, just purely to eat them. But the permit to do that, the Torah itself gives a permit. You are going to be able to do that. Post-desert, you're going to be able to eat them for your own pleasure. They don't just have to be part of sacrifices. But we saw that during the desert, they were allowed to eat fowl. So even though they weren't supposed to eat cattle for their own pleasure, they were allowed to eat birds. We see that because eventually they were eating quail in the desert. Initially, it was frowned. God wasn't happy because they were complaining about the mun, but it seems like birds and fowl became a regular part of the diet. But there's no discussion about fish. So fish are sort of there and not there. And the most glaring one that people that comes up is in this week's Torah portion, where what happened to the fish? How come the fish don't get a mention in the Noah discussion? But my way of characterizing it, the problem is that in the blessing it says you will show mastery, or you will manage the fish, and we do not see. We see man in the Torah managing animals. We see it in Noah. He manages the animals. He brings them onto the boat. He's eventually going to be able to eat them. We see man managing the birds. Noah, again, in the Noah story, you see him sending birds off to do, to act as agents on his behalf, to check for dry land. And we also eventually see that birds are eaten. But what you don't see in the Torah is the management of fish. It's one of our responsibilities, as what Rabbi Foreman likes to call middle management, that we're middle management. God creates it, and then he asks us to manage it for him. But what you do not see is the management of the fish. So that's how I characterize the problem. Where do we see humans as managers of the fish?